Here?
Yes, I'm here.
Tell them that we were all crazy about it. There was once a planet on which everyone was born wearing a set of funny nose and glasses. But since everyone wore them, no one saw anything funny about it. Started to look down to someone and say, well, you're wearing a set, but that's always dangerous. And I'm sure most of you have been through that, go up to pull it off somebody and it doesn't come off. The ruler of one kingdom announced to all of the people, I will tell you how not to be civilized, spiritual, or intelligent. All you need to do is stay distracted, which was certainly no stretch for any of them. One man declared, I am ruler of my house, and his mind just laughed at him. As one little sharp-eyed lad would head outside, his mama would say to him, whatever you do, don't go up on that mountaintop and look down at where we all live. For if you do, it'll ruin everything for you later, if you still have to live around here. Once upon a time, there was an eye of a hurricane, and for many years, he lived like every other eye. And then one day he realized he was stable amidst all that swirled around him. And here's the curious thing about it. He was only stable amidst it all when he would be aware that he was. But here's an alternative view of it that's even more curious. The ever-present eye of a hurricane is always stable, so it's not correct to say that he was only stable when he was aware of it. And yet, in a sense, it was so. For if at any given instant he was not aware of himself as a stable eye, then his awareness was totally absorbed in the churning turmoil part of himself. And that was that. Some people believe that to awaken you got to stay bundled up indoors. Some, hell, most. There was once some battery-operated toys that were made to run off of 6 volts. They could also operate off of 9, though few knew it or saw any need to. There was once an elephant who discovered himself living on a planet of ants. After his speech was completed, he took questions from the audience, and a man stood and said, other than struggling to become stably conscious, what is the most useless thing a man can do? If you live mostly in the body, you're sick some, then you die permanently. If you live mostly in the mind, you're sick constantly and feel like death will never come. I should not stop. At some of these, when there's more of a reaction, I should not stop and accentuate the reaction, because I'm sure when there is that kind of reaction, that kind of laughter, you're only doing it metaphorically on behalf of other people. We know that. One guy told a group of people, if you can now accept the idea that some evil force holds man back, then you're better off keeping that notion rather than listening to anything I might tell you otherwise. And several of them were grateful he said, might tell you otherwise, instead of could tell you otherwise. Didn't find that one so funny, did you? After coming out of a certain experience, one man thought, well, if that was an enlightenment, I'm not sure I'm ready for it. Follow up to an earlier story. If you wear the funny nose and glasses, you'll never realize how funny things are. Once upon a time, there was a man who read the story of Gulliver's Travels among the Lilliputians and concluded that it must be a metaphor regarding the mind and consciousness. And his mother cautioned him again, you're moving dangerously close to that mountaintop. Maybe if I change the camera angle. There was once a cow who learned how to see over the horizon, but since it required constant effort, which he couldn't muster, he took up talking to other cows about it, and in fact was eventually taken to be a teacher of such sight. On one world, whenever the creatures would threaten to get out of hand, life would simply direct local conditions to keep them yakking. There was once a mystical school whose institutional motto was, if you can be discouraged, you deserve to be. As he began to become more conscious, one man thought, as I look back on my earlier days, I'm now not so interested in knowing the secret of life as I am in understanding how a man shall live as long as I did in the condition I was in. And people wonder, where's the mystery in life? Of course, they don't wonder enough to look there. Living in the city, one man would sometimes think that things were looking up. Then it would not seem so. Then he'd think that things were looking down. But that proved not true. Then he went out on the open plain and everything looked plain. In the land of the mystical, talking about being stably conscious is the only thing you can talk about while not actually doing it. I'm aware this makes no literal sense, but hey, it is the land of the mystical we're talking about here. If you can't stop time, you can't stop the turmoil. There was once an eagle who found himself on a planet whose gravity was more than he could naturally overcome. Thank God that naturally is an expendable word. If you can't stop time, you can't stop the noise that distracts you. Chickens who look down at whatever attracts them on the ground will, I must tell you, remain forever mere chickens. If you can't stop time, you can't stop the fix you're in. If you don't know whether to blame genetics or the environment, always blame the environment. If you can't stop time, you can't stop the mind. And if you can't stop time, you'll never flag down the train. There was once a mystical school by a lake, which had a boat for the students' use. It was named the Self-Pity, and each day anyone who wanted to could ride it. It would sail out into deep water and sink. Notice after that the line at the pier whittled considerably. Life provided trees so that cows would have a safe place, would have a place to seek safety. And it provided for men to look to one another. I'm telling you, does life have a perverse sense of humor or what? Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting that some of you still don't know that. After giving his son his first archery set, the father informed him, never shoot awareness into the air, for where it'll fall, I know where. It'll fall into the mind. News which made the lads quiver shiver. One man began to see the winds of the earth as a metaphor for the conditions of consciousness. And one man wondered, when will metaphors ever end? When it's beasts who write fables concerning men, which would be the foretelling of the end of things as they are now. There was once a mystical school whose traditional principle was, if you're worried about the future, you've already flunked out and just don't know it. The inhabitants of one world were born with a film over their eyes, but unless you pulled it off, you never knew it. And oh yeah, there was no real need to do so. To help hide the secret, once they discovered it, the first stably conscious men concocted the idea of a great mystical search therefore. By God, thought they, that'll keep the thing hidden. When he heard the notion, what good is a book to a blind man? One guy asked himself, then what good are feet to a cripple? Or, well, this mind of mine to me. And was immediately sorry he had asked the question. There was once a universe in which the physically strong and attractive were more admired than the mentally so. The son of a mystic one day asked his father what kind of calendar or centerfold was available for him to hang in his room. There was once a race of beings, each born with a radio receiver, already tuned to a worldwide broadcasting station which furnished them with all the information they needed to survive. A few here and there found they could pick up other stations. At the terminal are certain trains you cannot ride if you ask about them. There was once an explorer who for many years sincerely followed the trails laid down by others before him, only to finally discover that they did him no good, other than the fact that without them he had never made the ultimate discovery. I would say, neat, huh? Except that I hesitate to single out one aspect of life as being neat when all aspects are. Which brings up another description of being more conscious and enlightened as simply a condition wherein you fully appreciate all of life's neatness. If you can't continually remember where you are, you're nowhere. There was once a land in which two major branches of mystical schools existed. One taught nothing, and the other ran constant classes. And periodically someone would come along who realized that they were both up to the same thing. Looking back at his mind, one man thought, I'm glad that's behind me. One man thought, if physically I can go from living on 2 sandwiches a day to half of one, and from 8 hours sleep to 3, what might be possible mentally? The trouble with education is that there is no trouble with education, but it cannot do more than it can do, and what is believed that it can do has been misconstrued. Although you can awaken other people, you can refrain from contributing to their sleep. Can, in this instance, being mandatory. One man once read a book and thought, this is just like being on one of those trains that's not going anywhere. The name of next week's game is, what is public entertainment? Believing that something in the air is the cause of man's problems continues to be the ordinary's explanation cum explication. One man says, the more conscious you become, the more shame you wish you had, so that you could be more ashamed for not being more conscious than you are more of the time. When one man heard it said that continual talk about something will cheapen and debase it, he went around after that constantly saying, my mind, my mind, my mind, my mind. Technically speaking, from a non-technical, silly point of view, the only real problem with the mind is that it stares. It continually, if not looked after, stares. Stares, stares, and stares some more, and is never aware of it. When one man realized that the coins in his pocket were naturally counterfeit, he quit worrying about it. There are 2 major reaction groups when it comes to hearing the secret talked about. The first group is offended by it, while the second is confused, but still somewhat interested. For many years it's been hoped a third group would appear, but alas. One man thought, as long as the drugs hold out, I can hold out. And his mind was momentarily revived and said, what was that? Everything the ordinaries say is to a conscious man a metaphor. Same as how everything his mind thinks is also. One guy thought, if it is hard to be humble when you're great, then it's hard to be stupid after you're awake. Not impossible. Oh, and okay, not really all that hard. But it should be, damn it, it should be. One knightly order taught, a warrior's mouth is good for many things, but talk is not one of them. And final news item, as a great mystical teacher lay dying, his final thought was, my absent-mindedness and reckless stupidity is unparalleled among men. At least he died in a more alert state. I guess we're still talking about what we've always been talking about. I notice how redundant I always say, well, tied to last time. Well, it was tied to time before last and time before that. Probably another lifetime, but here we go. There were several news items tonight. I simply changed the context, as some of you spot, such as there were once some battery-operated toys that could run off of 6 volts, and a few discovered that they could also run off of 9, although the rest of them never saw it. Plus, if they'd heard about it, they saw no need to. And the one of a man who asked a question, what could be of a greater waste of a man's effort than to struggle for some other state of consciousness? All of those not being new, for those of you who've been tuning in and listening to this, let me pluck out another old ritual. There has even been amongst the ordinary people attempts to derive some metaphorical message therefrom. There has been at all times, it's an eternal, it is a universal notion of the propriety of some way being born again. And religions, even before modern religions, no great importance, but there has been this notion, and you can find it at the heart of all religions that they say that. All that's required in that case, with such public collective activities as religion, to be born again is simply to pledge allegiance, to join up with an organization. And so that in the Islamic sense, you're a heathen, an infidel, unless you're converted to Islam, and you go into a mosque and you take whatever pledges it is. Same with all religions. And, well, I started to say it's of no real great importance, but it was even true, to give you unrecorded history, the good kind, the kind only I know. You could see all of that as being an offshoot at the physical level, at the survival level. You could see it as being a kind of idea of sacrificing to the rebirth of the seasons, that old thing again. But once man ate the tree, ate off the tree of knowledge, left the garden, what is not seen when it comes to the idea of being born again? I'll back up what I started to say. At the most basic functional level, to be born again and out in ordinary life, although it's a common term now, been around for thousands of years, to be born again in some way is simply to swear allegiance, to join primarily a religion. It could be some so-called mystical organization, but you swear allegiance, and that you say now, at least in a metaphorical sense, and you have now shown some physical evidence of your decision, of your interest, that you now are no longer just an ordinary person or a heathen. You now have a card that says, I am a Catholic. And very often they have some sort of little physical ritual, the most common being splashing a man with water, which I could also point out is a metaphor for a kind of birth. But here's what's never seen and the part that's missed. Everybody has already died once when you became a mental creature. Unadorned consciousness died. So everyone, in a quite valid sense, so no importance to the ordinary people, they have no interest in it. But from that view, everyone has already died once. The reality behind the idea of being born again for a few people is not to stay dead and merely mental. Because if we push much further, I'm sure that you'll see, as always, if for no other reason, why ordinary people are not interested in this, because it gives even the best of folks, usually, mentally, a migraine to try and follow it. To say that you died when you became a mental creature, from any ordinary view, sounds as though it was a misstep, because death represents, to most people, an occasion for non-jubilation. It is reported that most people have the bejesus scared out of them just thinking about death. And there's evidence of it everywhere. So to tell ordinary people that they have already died once, and of course they obviously would see it as being a metaphor for something or a symbol for something, they would be hard-pressed to see any validity to it, though, because then you would have to say something. You would have to give them some other description. They're going to say, well, I'm not dead, obviously. I was born of flesh on this planet. I physically was born, and you're saying that I have already died. In what sense? Which would be a fair question if I had said that publicly, and I would have to say something. And the easiest thing, the less disingenuous way to put it would be to say, well, unadorned consciousness died for the sake of your mind. that is, in the Western world, for instance, that is the story of the garden. Another interpretation, another use of it, is that is when Adam died. That is when the race of man died at one level as soon as he ate of the tree of knowledge, which that is the intellect. The nervous system became activated above the brainstem level. That man was then a mental creature, and he died at one level. But that makes no sense, literally, even if you take it as a metaphor, because you say, well, what? Because if you say you died, then the ordinary mind wants to say, well, in other words, death not being a positive thing, think they, then whatever it is that did die, we need to retrieve it. They would turn back to me or whoever was saying this and say, so you're saying that in some way we have got to resurrect what died. And you can't. It's not possible. And so after that, the mind sees nothing to do with it. Did I even manage to make that even cloudier than it should have been? That if, take it from, you played the part of an ordinary mind. Rather than let's talk about somebody else. Well, hey, I can do it, you can do it. That if it is said that everyone, when they become a mental creature, they have already died once. Everyone. Whenever, there's no particular magic age, but at 2 or 3, you begin to speak and your intellect became an important way in which you function and oriented yourself in life. You became a mental creature. When you appeared to start being a human, you probably spoke. It's the easiest way to put it. You begin to put sentences together. If the ordinary mind is told at that moment, in there, but when you became a mental creature, you and everyone else died already. Dead, dead, dead. And they say, okay, then what do you mean by that? Because it's obvious they did not physically die. There is no answer to that. Even though I put forth that you have died already. And then somebody would be well within their rights. If they were listening, go, well, in what way? And I go, well, there's no way to describe it. Which is one reason such as this is so popular that, the preface to a sentence or a paragraph can attract ordinary people, and has throughout the ages. That's why the idea of mysticism, great secret works and operations continue, because the idea is fascinating until ordinary minds get around let's just say something that may be closer. That once they get past the sign somewhere that says, great mystical secret work in this cave or in this building. Once they get inside, or you just get to the door and ask a few questions, like when's visiting hours, or can I come in, or does it charge, or anything. To the ordinary mind, as soon as they get somebody to the door, I mean, they see the sign looks to be, I'm speaking metaphorically, the sign appears to be straightforward. Great secret mystical work. That's it. No conditions. You get someone finally to the door, if you're lucky, and they peek through a hole, and as soon as you begin to ask them anything, such as, is that sign correct? As soon as that starts, ordinary mind finds everything from then on out to be extremely unproductive. Might I refer you back to I'll let you do your own, the byplay that I had brought up between the idea of the creator of God and Adam, and the whole point was to get the mind going. It didn't matter what God said to Adam, what he asked him. It didn't matter what Adam apparently did, because that story, that's the common one in the Western world with their stories, versions of that throughout the ages, of man running amok and God catching him. And it's always, he didn't just catch him, he always asked him about it. In every story, long before Christianity and Judaism, but he always asked. Well, think about that from an ordinary view. This great all-seeing, omnipotent God has to ask his creature, like, did you eat off that tree that I told you not to? Or did you go there and piss behind that bush I told you to stay away from? Whatever it is, why does he have to ask, even in the stories? Because immediately you think, well, if he's God, he knows everything. But he always asks. And he never leaves. He won't leave Adam alone until Adam answers. And what I was pointing at you last time, it doesn't matter what the question is, and it doesn't matter what Adam says. All that matters is that Adam answers. Because then you've got the opposition to one idea. And after that, the intellect is sparked. But if God, looking at it as being the vivus, the vital force in the universe, if it puts out one idea and it said anything to Adam, whatever it was, hey, do you know what time it is, bub? Or aren't you Adam? Or how tall are you? Whatever he says, Adam had the answer. And it's true in every story. But back to where we were. In this case, you can enrich the metaphor a little bit, because that would have already, he died when he answered. The rest of him driving him from the garden and all that, ordinary minds, that's about as far as they can hold their interest in the metaphor. That all you can do is put it out there and go, and then kind of let it drift off. Or the alternative is, you suddenly stick in a moral that may or may not have any direct validity to it, but by God, it seems to be conclusive. So you can give people the metaphor, and everybody's mind kind of wanders around and staggers. Then you go, the moral being that a good man is a family man. And people go, oh, which have got nothing to do with what he was talking about. But at least those who want to, and then anybody who might have gotten anything, when they hear that, they realize, well, that's bullshit. But the tree of knowledge just makes it a little more interesting, just right quick, is that was supposedly in the Western version, that he told him not to eat off of that tree, which represents in one way the obvious one being that represented man becoming a mental creature. But notice Adam had the answer still, because he had just eaten off the mental tree, the tree of knowledge. And God said, you eat off that. And he didn't answer. That meant that the fruit wasn't ripe. Or he put it in his mouth, but he didn't swallow it, as some people say. I guess those are different stories, but we'll go ahead. I can't remember where I heard that. Back to where I was trying to get you to see from your own view, and we're not talking about other people, as always. But if you say, which is a valid statement, that once you become a mental creature, you have already died. Everyone. That you were in one state, and you died that state departed once you became mental, once you became a mental creature. So the idea of some mystical or religious, supernatural notion of being born again with ordinary people is extremely ill-based, because it is not metaphysical, it is not supernatural, because they look at it just even theoretically. Take the Christian world, that's a common theme of the Christian, all the religions, and that you must be born again to see the kingdom of heaven, that you cannot be as you are. And so everybody says, well, yeah, because every heathen, as I pointed out, any person wired up to be minimally sound from an ordinary sense, everyone knows, everyone feels as though they should be converted. Everyone feels they should be doing better. So whether it's in a religious context or not, to say that you should be a different person, you should be a new person, everybody knows that. Ordinary people, the simpler they are, the more that they're simply living at the survival level, the more they take the revival of themselves to get a new car, get more money, to be famous, to have a better sex partner, live in a better neighborhood. But it's still the point that there is something else that men will attempt to do that no other creature on this planet will do once they're fed and screwed and slept good. Only man will continue to push on. Only man will get laid, get fed, have a night's sleep, and get up and still go, what'll I do now? Only man. No tigers, no bears, no wolves. Beavers I don't know about, but they're strange. We won't go into that because I'm afraid that's connected to that past story that I couldn't. I started to say, tie it together for yourselves, and someone already bent over and did. The idea of being born again, even when they try to discuss it in philosophical terms, theological terms rather than just crude physical religious rituals of swearing that they're joining the church or having water sprinkled on them or cutting their hair, doing something, a symbolic act. Even if they try and discuss it, the so-called philosophers, religious philosophers, they try to discuss it, is on the basis that really a man, and this is as deep as ordinary minds can take it, this is as extensive and expansive as it gets in the ordinary climb, and that is that if a man was really dedicated, if a man had some darn near semi-divine power, then he would struggle to be more Christ-like, more, whatever figure you were using, but Christianity, more Christ-like, that you would attempt to internally achieve a rebirth, that you would be a new person. You would not be that same old shabby, horny, greedy, aggressive, argumentative person that you know you are. Yeah. But I know we don't have time for it. The priest or anybody will tell you, if you say, well, what should I do? I can't seem to clear out. I joined the church. You did the baptism and everything. He said, I remember. And he said, but I'm going to tell you the truth. Internally, I feel about the same as I did. And the priest will say, if he's sane at all, which we won't go into that either. I can't go into everything, folks. Kicking around oxymorons will simply turn you into a cripple. But a reasonable priest or rabbi, if you say, well, I know I joined the church and swore that I would now be a new person, but to tell you the truth, other than now I attend services and I enjoy them, internally I'm still a rat-ass bastard I was. And the priest says, we all are. Jesus, you're human. But they will, as I said, at the so-called philosophical level, inside the world of religion, they will opine over the possibility that a man perhaps should be striving to actually experience a rebirth internally, not just externally, because people do apparently change roles externally. We've been through this, everybody knows it. Given the right conditions, liver out to here, a man who has been a steady drinker can, through some sort of brilliant epiphany, deep insight, damn near enlightenment, can quit drinking. It happens. Or spitting up bloods and parts of your lungs, people have been known to quit smoking. And you can say, well, I am now, and the church can demand it. Well, They say they demand it. They can direct that you should change certain behavior. Not eat this food, eat that food, do not indulge in alcohol. But they do not, no one takes it as far as, other than theoretical, as far as they take a rebirth if you will simply come to church or the mosque or the temple. If you'll do that, and if you pay lip service, if they say, well, did you quit eating meatloaf on Tuesday? Yes, I did. It's hard, but I guess it'll be worth it. They say, good boy, it will be someday. So you can apparently be a new person in some sense, that you are not behaving in exactly the same way you did. But when it comes to internally, all you got to do is know a minuscule amount. I know that's asking you a lot. All you've got to do is know anything, and you know that internally people do not change. Only ordinary people believe that they change internally, which is why they won't listen to any of this. Why they shouldn't. Hey, you can run off 6 volts. What you want out of me? Plus, can you prove it's better to draw off more? Nope. Well, why should I? No, you shouldn't. Case closed. At least people can leave and think, whew, at least they didn't try to convert me. No one likes electrical humor? If you tried back to where you were, you try to point to an ordinary mind, ordinary intelligence, that everyone has already died, and they say, well, in what way? And I've already told you there is nothing to say that is even of that level of confidence, which is problematic to start with. But after stating the fact that everyone, once they become a mental creature, have already died, that is shaky enough. But then for someone to ask, they should ask. They're going to ask, well, in what way did I die? Since it's obviously not physical, in what way, what are you referring to? And now it completely breaks down. But to carry on the monologue, I could have then said, well, there was a state of non-mental, unadorned, plain consciousness that a child, that humanity had, but a child even has. And that innocence, might as well use that word since ordinary people love that, and they continue to bring that up about mankind has lost their innocence and we should in some way revert or regain that childlike innocence. And man will be able to do so at the same time that he overcomes all of their difficulties and they become of like mind. But that would be about as good as I could respond if I was doing all this to an ordinary person. And so, well, there was this plain, direct, nonverbal consciousness, and as soon as man became mental, that died. Now that is really a load of crap. But if I'd said that, then people, it would almost fit. If an ordinary mind was listening to this and they were fleet enough of neurons, they might go, well, all right, I'm speaking for them now. They could say, well, all you're describing is just sort of a slightly skewed version of how man was originally a decent sort before Adam's sin, before we run amok, before we offended God. And what you're saying now, you're simply just rehashing general ordinary religious ideas that men should in some way be converted. They should go back to try and apply themselves to such efforts that would take them back to an earlier day wherein their heart was pure. They were good. And I can say, well, I know why you're saying that, and that's as big a load of crap as I just told you. But that's all the mind can make of it. Because if I say, well, something died and you can't revive it, then the mind says, well, what the hell is this thing about being born again? You can't revive what died. You cannot regain, or I'll put it this way, back to anybody who's lost their bearings here, in a sense. But see, now it makes no difference. You cannot back up. The tire damage you will suffer by backing up. You could have tires made out of not just steel radial bands, but out of God's underwear. And if you could back up, which you can't, but if you could back up, which is the ordinary mind's idea of the Elysian fields and paradise. That's the whole idea of life after death is going backwards. They sit in the future, but what they're trying to imagine is what it would be like before man was a mental creature. So, if you told ordinary minds what I did, and they respond if they heard it in a certain way about the best they could do, they say, well, all you're talking about is a conversion. All you're talking about is about what religion does, about people trying to be better, to get back to the state of grace, the state of a pure, unsoiled relationship between man and God before Adam sinned, before Adam ceased to follow proper instructions. You can't go back to that state. And what I started to say, or some of you may remember, the closest you could come, which you can't back up without doing great damage, but you can, through medical procedures or do it at home yourself, perform a frontal lobotomy on yourself. You can do that. And of course, ordinary minds are certainly not going to put up with this when you tell them, but that would be as close as ordinary people will ever get to their idea of heaven, or that's the closest an ordinary person will ever get to being reborn, in the sense that if man did err, that Adam did offend God, then I can put you back in that state. I'd prefer not to, not being a licensed holder of a tack hammer in this state. But I've told you how to slide it right up your nostrils and give it a tap. You can go back to the state of pre-Adam sinning, of pre-Adam eating off of the tree. But you do see that is absolutely absurd, because no one would do that. So to be reborn is not to be reborn in the sense of that which died. Which again, if you notice, no real importance, but ordinary minds of all their stories, all religions, almost every mystical cult, the leader dies. But does he stay dead? You know he doesn't. But he always comes back. But what does he come back as? It's him. Everybody recognizes him. What kind of rebirth is that? He always physically returns. And to them, that's proof. In the stories. That, well, by God, that's all I want is physically come back. Which I might suggest to you to do it again. These real figures are considered real. The Jesuses and the Socrates and Laos and Zoroasters and all of them. The idea in all religions that they died and they came back to life, and in some way is always that they died so that you won't have to die, or so that you will have a life after death. This whole thing about dying, I can assure you, this thing about that they came back, the Jesus story of 2 or 3 days that they actually saw him back in person. I assure you, the people like Jesus, once they were dying, they had no interest whatsoever. One of the few things I don't mind speaking, and I can speak for them. I assure you they had no interest whatsoever in coming back here physically. I'll leave it at physically. Just give you some way to weasel out, since it's coming up St. Weasel's holiday. I'll give you that rather than have to go buy you another one of those Happy Weasel Out cards. At any rate, that's the dreams of the ordinary. That, well, Jesus didn't let us down, or Muhammad, sure he died, but then he came back, riding down the cloud. That's the last thing. I assure you that Muhammad or Buddha, once they're gone, the last thing. If you ask them for a list of, the 20 things the 20 worst things that happened to you. I'm telling you, before root canal work, before having your toenails pulled out, before any of that would be, go back. So, now you go figure. Okay, well, surely some of you don't have to. But yet all the ordinary people who have not been born again, those who are not as enlightened as a Buddha or Mohammed, etc., their dream is, well, he came back. I don't have to carry this any further. It was just sort of I can tell you this. If some way accidentally, like ordinary people believe that all kinds of supernatural forces that no one understands, since they don't understand them, if in some way all these forces got out, some science fiction sense, and all these flashes of light and special effects, and a Buddha, a Moses died, and a few days later, but anyway, sometime later, he suddenly, through some kind of convergence of cosmic forces and black holes turning into wormholes and inverting on themselves in a cosmic, and suddenly they found themselves back here you would have one pissed mystic. You would not want to be there. If Buddha turned back around and went, God, what? He may have been reputed to be a decent, good-natured kind of guy, but you wouldn't want to be there if he did show back up. How can you say that everyone has died once they became a mental creature? We have all died. Every human died. You're dead once. So the idea of being born again, you do not have to go seek out a religion, even though as I said, they're not involved with anybody at the ordinary level, any kind of collective public effort. They're not actually involved with attempting to put that into action. But even their term of being born again, they absolutely ignore the fact that everyone has died already. That would absolutely, well, I'm exaggerating. I was going to say it would absolutely throw off all of their theoretical plans, which of course it wouldn't, because that's what theoretical plans and operations of the mind are. Somebody say, well, suddenly everything we know is wrong. And everybody goes, well, okay. And they turn it over. Well, that's simple enough. Hey, boss, everybody thought the world was flat, and it turns out it's not. Really? Are you sure? Yes. What are we going to do with all those flat globes you got and all that stuff? They go, no problem. It won't take them 2 or 3 minutes. That is the nature of the mind. But at any rate, it makes no sense to the ordinary mind to say that everyone has died already, because if you say that, the mind then would say, quite predictably, all right, what died? And you say, well, it was a form of non-mental consciousness died. As soon as you became mental, that died. That part of you is dead. And if in some way they thought, if they just went along with it and said, okay, then you're saying that they would want to believe that I'm saying that we lost something, because that's what death represents. That's why to ordinary minds, that physical death is the loss of the greatest thing you have, the only thing you've got, but at least the greatest thing you've got if you're not sick. So when you say that everyone's died already, then they take it as being a symbolic statement that you have lost something. And if you say, well, now if I'm going along with this, understand you're supposed to be seeing this operating inside your own nervous system, not me and some other person talking. But it's you struggling with it, and you say, well, I have already died. And the mind says, well, what part died? And to begin with, you couldn't even describe it. Let's say that you use my description. We can now use me as being your more alert part of your own nervous system. And I go, well, it was unadorned, non-verbal consciousness, non-specific awareness. This is, again, a load of crap, but here we go. Not unlike the awareness of, let us say, one of the large primates, a tiger. Of course, you get good. I could say a bunny rabbit, a bird, but non-mental awareness. The further you get down the food chain, I know it seems to be harder, but take a dog, a chimpanzee, one of those big cats, and you just see them, not in captivity, but see a film of them or see a dog running wild, and they have a kind of awareness. We're not trying to say it's anything approaching human consciousness, but there is an awareness. If you're a sentient creature and you're moving about in an environment, if you're not a tree, if you're not just sitting there going, feed me, help me, Jesus. If you're moving about, you have to have an awareness, because you're going to eat and eventually get eaten. But you got to have it's a simple awareness. Again, this is not by any means a perfect parallel, but there is enough to use it. It's the only one we've got since we're talking. So the ordinary mind could say, all right, I understand that. So you're saying that before men speak, before any individual speaks, they have an awareness, a kind of consciousness, but it's a non-mental consciousness, because you've got to be able to formulate words. There's one dead giveaway. So before that, you could say men are conscious in the same sense that a tiger is conscious. But once you become a mental creature, you have died at that level. An ordinary mind might say, well, okay, I'll go along that far, whatever the point is. But how do we get it back? And you go, well, that's not the point. And if they weren't sick of it already and ready to get in a pushing contest with me, they go, well, what the hell's the point? What they don't see is once you die at that level, you're supposed to stay dead. The whole idea of enlightenment or liberation of consciousness, the whole idea is for you not to stay dead for a few people. Not that it's your duty, not that men should do it, but that's what the itch is. That is what that special dissatisfaction is. That so-called mystics would be awakened. That is what the itch is. Another description of it is that you are dead and you come close to knowing it. Except what it is that's dead, you cannot revive it. You can end up the classical, almost inevitable trail, as I point out. You'll end up chasing religion a little while, your father's religion, and maybe other religions. They all go, yes, there's such a thing as a rebirth. Yes, that's what religion is. That's why God sent Zoroaster, Buddha, Lao, Confucius, anybody. That's why He sent them there, so that someday you'll revive again. And for a long time, people involved in this, they don't know how to phrase it. That's not the point. But they realize, or it strikes them, that's not satisfying. Even if you're correct, and you say, well, someday you'll know it all, and someday we'll all rise out of the grave if you're a good Buddhist or Christian or Jew. That won't do. And for a long time, people involved with such as this are interested, they do not know why it won't do. They can laugh at it. Well, assume you don't get stuck there. They can say, well, that's just a load of crap. You can't prove it. That's still not it. What they're feeling is the dissatisfaction that they're dead now, and without them being able to say it, they have this feeling that in some way I could get undead now. But they don't know how. They don't even know how it is that they feel dead. Because they ask somebody else, if you're an ordinary person, if you, a strange reaction is probably, many of you got along in your early years of trying to talk to adults or people apparently expert in such matters. As strange a reaction and look as you got, what if you'd stumbled upon the idea if you went to a priest or a rabbi or your father or a philosopher somewhere and you went, I need advice. You look like the person, they go, well, what can I do? And you go, I feel like I'm dead. They would want to, they'd look in their little reference Rolodex and refer you to a psychiatrist. And you go, no, it's nothing, I actually feel that there's something in me that's dead. Well, okay, kid, all right. Don't get excited. That makes no sense. And yet that's exactly what it is. That everyone has died, but only a few people have any sensation of it. Everyone else that comes out is all sorts of things. At the extreme simplistic end is a kind of guilt. Of course, they have to learn that word. It has to be explained, and many people latch onto that, which ties directly into all religion, the whole idea that I feel guilt of being alive in all religions. And if not religions, it'd be the culture of some group of people. They have a story. The obvious one being, like Adam in our case, that man, our forefathers, offended the gods. And we're paying for it. Used to, life was a breeze. Life was a bitch. Life was a vacation, constantly. But, Adam, somebody made God mad, and now look at us. And as soon as you hear that, most people go, huh. And they finally think, well, now it makes sense. And that's the end of it for them. They toddle on off, and anytime they feel bad, they think, well, it's no more than we deserve. It is a kind of living death, but it's from here up. It affects into what ordinary people would think of as being their emotions, but it is from the neck up that people are dead. Waiting until you physically die is a game for the ordinary. People who are actually wired up to pursue such as this, I do not have to encourage it. I don't have to say, well, you know damn well that you can't wait around to die and hope that you'll suddenly be enlightened, and hope that suddenly you'll quit itching, hope that you'll suddenly be satisfied. Physical death won't do it, because you have already died in the only sense that has any pertinence to a more alert person, to a more conscious person. Now the trick is, the whole object is not to stay dead. And I should leave the object, I should have expanded. The whole object is not to stay dead and merely mental. See, because if you took even the poor description that I said I could give in reaction to the question as to what died, and if I'd told someone, well, what died was nonverbal consciousness. It died once you became mental. Then they keep thinking, well, you're saying that in some way that the whole effort of mysticism or this sort of thing is to regain that state. And it's not. It's dead. You cannot revive it. As I said, if you could, the closer you can come would be a frontal lobotomy. Go knock yourself out, and if that makes you happy, then hey, I was wrong. If you go, hey, I like it. Of course, you can't tell anybody. But if you sit there looking like, Alfred Eden Newman, or you're an alderman that just got voted out of office and now doesn't have a job. See, as always, life is just. I can make a statement like, cutting off the frontal cortex, cutting off your frontal lobes, cutting off the higher intellect in a man would not make him happy. That's not what it would do. Notice how life works, though. If someone heard that, well, I'm not sure you're right, and they went out and had a lobotomy, how can I ever prove that I was right? I can bring them in here and say, all right, I told you that wouldn't make him happy. All right, did it work? Well, come on, tell him. Don't make me like an ass. I found a guy had a lobotomy. Hey, who can say? So I could be wrong. But the thing is, if he's happy, he doesn't know it. You can't back it up like that. You're attempting the whole idea of being born again. Remember, it's not to bring back what was there, which is what makes the stories very simplistic and ridiculous, non-useful. The idea of Jesus and people, these figures actually coming physically back to life. That's not what it is. That's why it doesn't make any sense. That's why it can't be used other than a dream, other than as a pacifier for children that, well, someday you won't be dead after you're dead. What people who are interested in this are after, I'm just giving you a new description of something that might be of use, is something died in the nervous system that cannot be revived no matter what you do. But you're still attempting to experience another birth. But you've got to do it. And if you stay dead, if you simply walk around thinking as you do now, if you walk around taking you to be you, if you take the noise running through your own station, you were born with it, it was already operating, it'll tell you all you need to know to survive. But until you can find out that there are other stations, until you can find out that you do not have to listen to your mind and it's irrelevant, you're dead. I guess we can leave on an upbeat note. Damn. Remember that mystical school's motto, if you get the blues, you deserve to have the blues.